This is going to be the last part of the first set of slides, slide set A, and then I'll do another recording for the second set, slides B. But anyway, we're still talking about chemical bonds, and I mentioned to you that with covalent bonding, those bonds can be polar or nonpolar. And the polarity has to do with whether or not the atoms that are chemically bonded share the electrons. When they do share electrons, sometimes there are atoms that have a stronger pull on the electrons than others. So if that happens, we call that a polar covalent bond. But a nonpolar covalent bond is when we have equal sharing of electrons between atoms, or at least we can say there's not like a more positive end of the molecule and a more negative end of the molecule. It's pretty evenly balanced. So it results in an electrically balanced nonpolar molecule, and carbon dioxide is an example of that. Actually, oxygen is more electronegative than carbon, so it does carry a slightly negative charge compared to carbon, but you've got two slightly negative charges on either end, so it doesn't result in an imbalance in charge. There's not one end of the molecule that's positive and the other that's negative. So carbon dioxide is nonpolar. And then polar covalent bonds result from unequal sharing of electrons. And let's see. For down here, for atoms that are more electronegative, that means that they have a stronger hold or a stronger ability to attract electrons than other atoms. Oxygen is a very electronegative atom, for example, and hydrogen is more electropositive. So when you have a molecule like water, the oxygen is chemically bonded to both of the hydrogen atoms, and the hydrogen atoms are kind of bent toward the one end of the molecule. So you have an oxygen end that's slightly negative and a hydrogen end that's slightly positive. And we call that polar. You'll see a picture in a minute. Oxygen is the more electronegative atom. And so it gives the oxygen end of the water molecule a partially negative charge and the hydrogen a partially positive charge. And partially is the symbol for that is this lowercase delta. It's a Greek letter. So here's our oxygen. Notice it matches up with the structural formula over here. The red atom is our oxygen atom, and it is more electronegative, so it has a negative charge here. And then the hydrogens, compared to the oxygen, they are more electropositive. So they do share electrons. Each hydrogen shares a pair of electrons with the oxygen. But, and that's represented by these single bonds here. Each single bond represents a pair of electrons, one belonging to the hydrogen and one belonging to the oxygen. But the oxygen has a much stronger pull or attraction for those electrons. So we give it a slightly negative charge, and then the hydrogen end is slightly positive, and you can see where that makes it polar. Not north and south poles, but positive and negative poles. So we have three kinds of bonds so far. We have the ionic bond, and the example we used was sodium chloride. The sodium lost an electron and became positive. The chlorine gained an electron and became negative. And now that they are oppositely charged ions, they have an attraction for each other. With covalent bonding, the electrons are shared, but they are shared unequally in a polar covalent bond, like we see in water, and then they're shared equally in a nonpolar covalent bond like we see in carbon dioxide. And what this matters, the reason this matters chemically is because substances that are ionic or polar will dissolve in water, but if they're nonpolar, they don't dissolve well in water. A lot of our lipids or fats or oils are nonpolar covalent bonds or nonpolar covalent chemicals. Now, let's talk about a hydrogen bond. A hydrogen bond is not a true chemical bond. It is a weak bond between molecules. It is not a bond between atoms that forms a compound or molecule. It is a bond between molecules. So in particular, we're going to look at water molecules, and I'm going to actually try this. I'm going to try playing this. I know I said I wouldn't show the animations, but I just kind of want to see how this one works out. I didn't mean to do that. Okay.
The atoms that make up a water
Okay, so I'm going to watch this later and see how that turned out, and if it turned out pretty well, if it's a good video, I'll show it within the lecture. But this is a picture of what we just looked at, and just notice that for the water molecules, they're going to be lined up, so the hydrogen end of one water molecule, which is slightly positive, will face the oxygen end of another water molecule, which is slightly negative. So it's a weak attraction, but it's an attraction because of slightly different charges between the molecules. And it causes a lot of the properties that water has that makes it important for living things. It causes the surface tension so that this water strider can walk on the surface, or other insects can walk on the surface of the water. Now we're going to look at chemical equations. Chemical reactions occur when chemical bonds are formed, rearranged, or broken. For all chemical equations, we have reactants on the left normally and products on the right. The reactants are like in the ingredients in a recipe, and the products are like the final cake or cookies or whatever that you are baking. So in this, well, I'm going to skip through some of this stuff, sorry. Okay, well, the first type of chemical reaction that we're going to look at is called a synthesis reaction. An example of where we see this is, when we eat, let's just say steak. Okay, we eat steak. It's composed of a lot of protein that breaks down into amino acids. Amino acids are the building blocks. Those amino acids end up absorbed into our bloodstream. And then our liver can use those amino acids to make proteins that are needed by our body. So that is a synthesis or building reaction, when amino acids are joined to form a protein, or when glucose molecules are joined to form a starch, that kind of thing. Now, decomposition reactions are breakdown reactions. So that would be, going back to this picture, that would be when we break down the proteins in the steak and break it down into the individual amino acids that make up those proteins. So we call breakdown reactions catabolism or catabolic reactions, and they are abbreviated like this. You have a chemical, A and B are not symbols on the periodic table. It's just to represent that this is a larger chemical composed of substance A and substance B, but this is one substance, AB, that's broken down into its components, A plus B. So breakdown reactions are decomposition. And this is an example of a decomposition reaction when glycogen, which is stored in our liver cells and our muscle cells, breaks down into glucose molecules, and then those glucose molecules are released into our blood. This happens whenever we have like low sugar. So glycogen is kind of like starch in that way. It's long chains of glucose that are stored in our muscles and our liver cells. And then we can also have exchange reactions where elements can switch places. This is an example where you have chemical AB, chemical CD, and then the D and the B switch places, and you get AD plus CB. And it shows you an example here of that type of reaction. We also need to talk about oxidation reduction reactions. They're also called redox reactions. I'm laughing because I call them oxidation reduction reactions, and they've written it here, reduction oxidation reactions. I guess so you can see where the word redox comes from. But that just means that if you have two reactants, one is oxidized and one is reduced. And what that means is one of them loses electrons and the other one gains electrons. If it is reduced, that means it gains electrons. And if it's oxidized, it loses electrons. Now, this oxygen is going to be reduced because it's going to be converted to carbon dioxide, and it's going to gain electrons from the carbon, from the 6 carbons. And the glucose molecule is oxidized because it is going to be broken down. It's going to lose electrons. The electrons that belong to the hydrogen are going to become part of this water molecule. So the glucose is actually going to be converted to carbon dioxide and the hydrogen removed from it. And that means it's going to lose electrons. And it's oxidized when it loses and it's reduced when it gains. And something that you can use to help you remember that is the mnemonic device oil rig. Let's see. OILRIG. And that's something used in chemistry to help you remember oxidation is loss, reduction is gain, and loss means loss of electrons, gain means gain of electrons. Exergonic reactions release energy. If they're catabolic reactions or breakdown reactions, they're always exergonic. Endergonic reactions absorb energy, and anabolic reactions or synthesis reactions are endergonic. They use energy. Some chemical reactions are reversible, and that means you're going to see an arrow that goes either way. They can go in the forward direction and produce product, or the product can break back down into the reactants. Speed of chemical reactions can be affected by temperature. Many times higher temperature will increase the rate of the reaction. Concentration of reactants. The higher the concentration of your reactants, the more product that you can make. So usually that will increase the reaction rate. And the smaller the particles are. That's why we chew up our food, to break it down and have smaller particles that can be broken down at a faster rate by our digestive system. Catalysts increase the rate of reaction, and enzymes are biological catalysts. They speed up reaction rates, and they are always proteins. That's important. And that is it. I'm going to move on and do the next lecture on the slides in part B.